Hey guys, Christina here with One Creative Direction. How are we doing, everyone out there? Hopefully everybody's staying cool in this hot weather. At least it is here in Ohio. So tonight, I'm going to do a little bit of, I guess, training and answering questions on how to coat using Brite Tone. And how I coat how I coat my coasters. So this is what my finished coaster sets look like, at least the ones in the boxes. I didn't bring any of my ceramic ones in, but I wanted to show an example of what mine look like when I'm done. So I have quite a few videos on how to do these coasters and lots of detail on, you know, finishing coasters, etc. But I wanted to do a little bit of an updated question, answering some questions that I've gotten via instant messenger and comments, etc. So I wanted to show you, what they look like when they're done. I have videos that have finished coasters in them, but you can see they look really nice. And as I've mentioned, typically what I do is you can do 4 to 5 coats of Brite Tone. That's what I do. I was told that you could do less layers. I'm not comfortable doing less layers. I feel like the way that I'm doing them, I've tested them with the number of coats that I'm putting on, so I feel very comfortable selling my coasters the way that I'm making them. I mean, if anybody else out there wants to do 2 coats or 3 coats or whatever, that's really your decision and your choice. But I'm just going to go over what I do and what I'm comfortable doing. So some of the questions that I've had are issues with various things like application. So the first thing we're going to cover is the application of Brite Tone. So, and I'll get into this in a little more detail once I get through the application portion. But I've had other questions related to, issues and such. So what I do is I already have 2 coats of Zinsser shellac, and I'll show you that when I'm done coating this. So Brite Tone, it's not like resin. So I'm just gonna kind of, ramble as I'm coating this. Brite Tone is not like resin where you set it on a cup and you just pour the resin on top of it. I have seen at least one video of a very popular artist using Brite Tone on some like small canvases, and it was very liberally applied and very sloppily. And everything you do is really your choice. So I put a little bit on and I just take my brush and I try to evenly coat it. You don't want a thick layer of Brite Tone. You want a very thin layer, okay? Now I use the extender in mine that gives you a little bit of extra working time, but you don't want to just keep working your brush over it. So as you can see, it's not thick. I mean, you can barely even see it. If that was resin, I think you would be able to see a profile of the actual resin. But with this, you can see that it's super thin. Now, I don't want you to be fooled by the fact that this product does say self-leveling. It is, which is designed so it doesn't leave the brush strokes. But if you're not applying it in the right conditions, you're going to get brush strokes, okay? If you're applying too much, if potentially you're not using the extender or you're working the product too much, you could potentially get brush strokes. I have seen people use really cheap brushes. I started out using cheap brushes. I went to this really nice brush I got at Michael's. I was fortunate enough to get quite a few of them on clearance for like $3 to $5. They're really nice. This was a Grumbacher, but it's very soft brush. You want a soft brush. The softer the brush, the less likely you are to leave brush marks, okay? And you don't want to press down really hard when you're applying it. You want to very lightly go over the surface and just spread it evenly, right? You want a really light layer. So the way Brite Tone works is you build your gloss with each layer that you add, okay? And another issue that people have mentioned is cloudiness. And if you're familiar with resin, a phenomenon with resin epoxy called fish eyes. And what fish eyes is basically when you lay when you put the epoxy on and it spreads out and self-levels, and I use that in air quotes, when it dries, it leaves like a splotchy appearance, like bare spots, and they call those fish eyes. And I've had a few people ask me about fish eyes with Brite Tone. If you're getting fish eyes with Brite Tone, I'm going to guess, and without knowing your process or seeing your application, I'm going to guess that you're putting it on too thick. And what happens, if you put Brite Tone or Crab Coat or Extreme Protection, any of the Crystalac products, if you put them on too thick, they're not going to dry properly, and they're not going to dry evenly, and you may or may not get those fish eyes. And then you may or may not have issues with it bubbling later because it's not drying properly between coats. So as an example, if I put a thicker layer on these coasters, and per Crystalac guidelines, you can reapply in 3 to 4 hours. Now I wait 4 hours minimum. If I'm using the extender, I wait 5 hours. When you add the extender, you add time between layers, okay? So if you're not allowing enough dry time because your layers are too thick, you're gonna get those fish eyes, okay? And no amount, it's not like resin, and no amount of sanding is gonna take that away. So you wanna make sure that you're applying it correctly every time. I mean, one of the advantages of resin is that if you get those fish eyes, you can sand and, you know, pour another coat of epoxy on, and it should fill those areas in. Crystalac's a lot different. You're building the gloss by adding layer by layer. And there's no right or wrong answer to how many layers you can put on your products, your canvases, your coasters, or anything else. There's no right or wrong reason. It's really your preference, your client's preference, because, you know, every layer that you add gloss, you build that gloss, you build that protection, okay? But keep in mind that you obviously don't want to put more layers on it than you need to, or, you know, desire to, simply because, you know, you're just, at that point, you're number one, wasting money and time. So that's why I stick with the you know, 4 to 5 if I'm going straight Brite Tone. So on to the next issue, and that is, I've had some folks ask about cloudiness. I was getting some cloudiness, but only on my dark base coats. Like if I did if I can't even speak, if I did black as my base or my pillow or whatever, you know, process I'm doing, there was a couple of times where I had really bad cloudiness. It didn't matter how many times I sanded and reapplied, I was still getting the cloudiness. So after talking with the owner, he said it's just, you know, the nature of the beast of acrylic paint, right? So that's when he suggested using the Crystalac first, or not the Crystalac, the shellac first, or the Extreme Protection first before the Brite Tone. So that's when I changed my process. Man, I cannot speak tonight. That's when I changed my process to 2 layers of Extreme Protection or 2 layers of the shellac prior to applying the Brite Tone. Now, there are still many times that I'll just go straight into the Brite Tone. And there's no issue with that. I mean, it's really your process for you to decide what's best for you, obviously. So, so yeah, that helps counteract that cloudiness. I've not seen it since I changed my process, which is a good thing. So, I'm going to show you a close-up of one of these coasters prior to me adding the Brite Tone, so you can see what it looks like before I add the Brite Tone. And I will tell you that by using the shellac, it does make the application of the Brite Tone much easier. And I'll go over that here in a minute, but it makes it much easier. It's really smooth. If you've ever put Brite Tone straight on a dried acrylic item, it seems to the first layer kind of sucks it up. So it dries really, really fast. And the shellac, if you apply that first, you eliminate that issue. Not that it's a big issue. I mean, it doesn't create any problems or anything, but it does make it a lot easier. It goes on a lot smoother. So I don't know if you can see this, but I have already put 2 layers of shellac on this. I have a bunch of coasters, so I just took them outside and sprayed them the other day when it was nice. And you can see how nice and shiny that is already. That's just 2 light coats of shellac. And when I say shellac, this is what I'm talking about if you haven't seen my other videos. This is Zinsser Bullseye Shellac. And what you need to keep in mind is, if you're going to use this, you have to wait a minimum of 48 hours for this to gas off of the products before you start putting Brite Tone on them. So that's why you have 2 paths, 2 choices, as far as, how I do mine. If you just start with the EP, you don't have to wait when you start doing Brite Tone. So you can do 2 layers of this, wait the 4 to 5 hours, and then go straight into Brite Tone. Now, I always wait just because, I don't paint or do stuff in my paint room every day. So it's usually a couple of days anyway, sometimes more after I do one of these 2. Sometimes in between layers of Brite Tone, it's quite a bit of time as well. So I wanted to show you one that doesn't have any coating on it at all. It's just dried. They've been dry for a couple of days. This is how much shinier my coasters are prior to the top coat, because I'm using Extreme Protection in my bloom recipe, which I will be putting out a video here in the next couple of days on my updated bloom recipe. So stay tuned for that. But you can see that it adds that extra shininess, and I feel like it makes the colors more vibrant. After I started using the Extreme Protection as part of my recipe for mixing my bloom colors, not only does it really make the colors stand out more and more vibrant, but it also gives you a much better consistency on your bloom colors. They don't thicken up. They're not too thick, and you don't have to, water them down with Jasanya, water, Minwax, whatever. You don't have to water. I mean, they're the perfect consistency every single time, no matter if you're using tube paint, fluid colors like golden fluid acrylics, or pigments. They're perfectly consistent as far as flow every single time, and that's one of the major advantages of changing my recipe. That was one of the first things I noticed immediately. I mean, outside of the fact that I hadn't used pigments in a while, just because I struggled so much with using pigments with my previous recipe. With this new recipe, no issues. I mixed up a ton of pigments right away, and it works beautifully with pigments. And that was one of the reasons I never ordered any TLP pigments. I only have the color art ones that I ordered a long time ago. And they've actually sat in my art room for almost a year without using them because I struggled with having any kind of success with them. Even using the poly mixture that comes with them, I still could not get a good result with them. But this new Bloom recipe, absolutely amazing. Okay, so some of the other questions that I've gotten. So we covered cloudiness, we covered application, and you guys can continue watching me apply this as I'm talking. We covered fish eyes. Now, one of the other questions I've gotten more than a few times is using Crystal-Lac products either after you've tried putting resin on a product, or applying resin and it didn't work, or you had a reaction to resin and you wanted to switch to Crystal-Lac products. So I'm going to address both of those. You can interchange the products. You can use resin after you've used Brite Tone, and you can use Brite Tone after you've applied resin. Here's the caveat. You have to wait the full cure time before you go from one to the other. No matter which way it is, resin first or BT first, you have to wait the full 30 days cure time. Resin cures in 30 days and Brite Tone cures in 30 days. So if you put Brite Tone down and you're having issues and you switch back to resin, you have to wait 30 days in order to coat over it with Brite Tone. Same the opposite. If you used resin and you had a reaction and you want to switch to Brite Tone and you want to finish your products. Now, this happened to me when I switched. Before I started doing art, I did tumblers, and I had a bunch of tumblers that I was in the process of finishing. Some of them only had one layer, some of them need sanded and redone, and I had a horrible reaction to resin, and so I had all these tumblers that I needed to finish. Well, by the time my reaction cleared up, it was over 30 days. And at that point, I had discovered Brite Tone, and I finished all those cups with the Brite Tone over the resin, and they turned out perfectly. And every cup I've done since then, I don't do them really that much anymore, only when my friends want them. I've used Brite Tone on all of them. It works beautifully on cups. That's actually how I started using Brite Tone. So I learned, you know, that route. But I think one of the biggest problems I think people have is adjusting. If you've used resin or anything else, is understanding, you know, the application and the fact that you have to build the layers. Okay, you can't just slop it on real thick and be done. It's just, it doesn't work the same. The biggest advantage to using Brite Tone is the fact that it's not toxic. As you can see, I'm sitting here in my art room, no respirator, no gloves, no mixing, no fumes, and I'm applying it in my room. Another thing I wanted to mention is feel free to use your fingers. There are tons of people that do tumblers that apply the Brite Tone with their fingers, their thumb, their forefinger, whatever you're comfortable with. It's perfectly fine. It's water-based. You're not going to hurt anything. In my experience, I feel like I get a better overall appearance with a brush, but it's like everything else. It's your personal preference. It's what works best for you. Okay. So I hope that I was able to answer a lot of questions. So again, here's the 2 items that I use, and you can use one or the other, 2 coats of one or 2 coats of the other. And then for this, wait 48 hours, then apply your Brite Tone, whether that's 3 layers, 5 layers, whatever that, you know, whatever your preference is. Same with this, 2 layers and then straight into Brite Tone, no wait time. And then keeping in mind that when you sand, if you get to a point where you have to sand, which Crystal-Lak recommends every 4 to 5 layers if you're using straight Brite Tone, and if you're using the EP and then the Brite Tone, again, 4 to 5 layers. I've put as much as 6 and not had to sand. It looked fine. Now, when I did my huge table, I sanded after, I think, 5 layers because I knew I was going to put more, and I was using crab coat, by the way. I knew I was going to use more layers because it was going outside and I wanted to make sure it was really protected. So I sanded after 5 layers, and then I added another 3 or 4 layers. I can't remember what my total number was. And so it looks beautiful. And this is what I use to sand. Crystal-Lak recommends a 440 grit, which is, I mean, there's barely any roughness to it, but that's all you have to do. And when you sand, and I'm not going to actually sand this, but when you sand, you are just barely touching the surface. And when I sand in circular motions, and I'm just going to take like 1 or 2 passes over my product, and then I'm done. Okay? It's not like resin where you're just like pushing and giving it everything you got. You're barely touching the surface, and you're just barely applying any pressure, and just until it gets slightly cloudy. Okay? And then before you put Brite Tone on, again, after you sand, if you have to get to that process or to that point, after you sand it, you don't put any chemicals on here. You want to make sure that you are wiping it off, or if it's something that you can run under water, like my ceramic tiles, if I have to sand those, I just rinse them with water and I put them in a drying rack. Now, you don't want to let them sit because you don't want them sitting in water. You can lightly dry them off with something that's not going to leave a lot of lint. So you want to make sure, you know, you're keeping the dust out of your process. So once you've wiped them off, you need to let them dry. I typically, if I'm going to sand, I sand at night, clean them with, whether that's a wet paper towel or under the, you know, water. I let them sit overnight before I coat them, just to make sure that it's dry, because if you were to sand, go in and rinse them off and then immediately try to put Brite Tone on, it's probably not going to be completely dry to the point where you would want to immediately put Brite Tone on top of that. So that's why they recommend that it's best to leave it overnight. And that's what I typically do, unless I sand first thing in the morning and then do Brite Tone before bed or something like that. So then you know for sure that they're dry. So hopefully that covers a lot of ground, answers a lot of questions for folks that I've been getting messages about. If you have any more questions, feel free to send me an IM, send me an email, put a comment in. I try to answer all the comments that I get. But yeah, I really appreciate you, everybody that watches my videos, that's a return watcher. If you're not a subscriber, please consider hitting that subscribe and notification bell. And I wanted to remind everybody that Crystal-Lak is running a sale, 25% off, starting this Sunday at 6 p.m., which is July 3rd, 2022, in case anybody's watching this later. And it runs for 1 full week, so it will end on July 10th at 6 p.m. And that's 25% off. I will again put the discount code in the description box and a link to the Crystal-Lak website. If anybody's interested, I'll put that in the description box. Yeah, again, thanks for watching, for coming along with me, and feel free to reach out if you need anything. Thanks, guys. Catch you on the next one.